Hello guys, a very good afternoon. This is just to get in touch with you once again. And I want to share something about my upcoming video on Indian writers in English. Especially post-colonial writers and post-colonialism. And I just wanted to give a synopsis of what it's going to include in particular. I'm not going to touch upon all the post-colonial writers because that would be rather comprehensive. It would be like include around 200 years of literature. But this is primarily intended for the literary enthusiast in the Asian subcontinent, might include India and Pakistan. And if I have to talk about the Indian writers specifically, since the British imperial rule lasted for around 200 years in India, and the Britishers, especially the framer of the education system that was to serve the intended outcome of the Britishers, Macaulay once said that he wasn't of the good opinion or a favorable opinion regarding Indian writers at the time, and he in fact looked down upon the kind of literary anthologies that were available at the time, and in his manner upon Indian education introduced in 1833, he prescribed English as a means of instructions, and what he claimed is that the English tongue would be the most useful for our native subjects. In fact, Macaulay admitted quite candidly that he hadn't read any of the Sanskrit and Arabic books and yet didn't desist from making such a pronouncement. And quite sheepishly, he remarked that a single shelf of a good European library is worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. Probably he wasn't pretty aware of the the mammoth literary corpus that really existed in India in totality, but it was haphazard in sense India was divided into north and south, and we had Sangam literature in the south, and it was haphazardly spread all over the subcontinent, and there was no way of collecting and archiving. So Sanskrit language wasn't in favor of it. It was a dying language, and it was a bit paltry, and compared to the European literature, which was better preserved, organized, with libraries all around and with free access to probably the propagation of the Christianity through Bible, and Bible was made available to each and every individual somehow or other, and everyone has an access to the book. That wasn't the case with these colonies, because the impoverished masses, they didn't have the access to any kind of education institution that could cater to the urge or the inclination towards reading. In fact, reading was a pastime of only privileged lots, those who were called babus or clerical or those upcoming aristocrats and landlords and fiefdoms who used to have access to literature of whether native language or whether it was English. And English was supposed to be a medium of instruction for churning out clerks and bureaucrats and those who were prescribed, or a prescriptive kind of curriculum was introduced, and that really served the interests of the bureaucratic setup, not the masses. And since the access to education was a prerogative of a handful of people with riches and with the proximity or the close association with the people in the offices, in the courts, in the tax collection offices, Bengal, Madras, Delhi, and only metropolitans and places where we had institutions, age-old institutions, established ones, and since the British government favored English language alone at the cost of all other regional languages, and it was a move to keep the masses not literate in the true sense, but only to feed them with so much of information that they could be, readily available as a robotic workforce. And Babu English, that was a term was used, and that was the first offspring of the unholy encounter between the British language, English language, and the unwilling Babus. So my concern here is that despite all the oddities and inaccessibility to the education institutions and not much urge or resources available to get the sort of formalized kind of English education, there were certain luminaries, literary luminaries, that made a mark, and they came up with some of the genuinely gems of novels and dramas, and no doubt Rabindranath Tagore will be the foremost, because his was recognized one of the literary giant, and ultimately that paved the way for his being a Nobel laureate, and he was the first Indian, or probably the Asian, to get this Nobel Prize for his work that originally cast in Bengali and Gitanjali, and the good thing about Rabindranath Tagore was that he was prolific and he was equally good and well versed in both the languages, Bengali and English, at the same time. That there was another guy, a notable one, Bankim Chand Chatterjee, who went on to attain high stature as a writer, produced other novels in his mother tongue, Bengali, of which Anand Mat, 1882, and Durgeshandani especially deserve mention. The period from 1850 to 900 is an imitative phase when the Indian poets are romantic poets. I mean, they try to ape the ways of the romantic poets like Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, Byron. And they were supposed to be the chief source of inspiration at the time, because they were widely read, widely circulated. And these Indian writers tried to assimilate the Romanticism with the early 9th century British poets and the new Romantics of the decadent period, expressing the consciousness of the Indian Renaissance. between nationalism and political changes, which ultimately led to the attainment of political freedom in 1947. So these poets, to say the least, at heart they were the true nationalists because they wanted their products and pieces of writing and poetry to be the hallmark of creating awareness and promoting true nationalism among masses. Even our national anthem and all that, that was the outcome of a sort of poetry. So the first phase of Indian poetry was a period of literary renaissance in India. One of the other notable known, like Deruzia's poems, Kasi Prasad Ghosh, the Shire or the Minster, other poems, and then Madhusudan Dutt's The Captive Lady, then Manmohan Singh Ghosh's love songs and elegies. These are the testimony of the creative upsurge occasioned by the romantic spirit and probably triggered by the literary renaissance. Toru Dutt is another notable guy who, among these romantic poets, puts India on the map and its heritage. He talks in plenty, and there is a large number of Indian legends. This Toru Dutt's romanticism, and he was actually the predecessors. And he demonstrated his prowess, military prowess, by writing lots of childhood memory poetry with nostalgia and regrets. Sarojini Naidu could be another notable figure, and Harindranath Chattopadhyay was also one among that really need mention. While Aurobindo was a search for the divine in man, Tagore's was the quest for beautiful in man and nature. Sarojini Naidu, on the other hand, the romantic muse, underscored the charm and splendor of tradition in life, and the kind of lyricism, the melody, the verbal melody that we find in Sarojini Naidu's. Like, I remember one poem, The Palanquin Bearer. It's so melodious and so full of alliterations and imagery, and it's to be sung. In fact, it's not a poem per se, it's to be sung, it's a song. So there was a gradual growth of novel in English from India. Ramesh Chandra Dutt was another figure. And to name, there's no end of, there's no dearth of people, literary writers in India before we really attained our independence, and they didn't have the wide circulation, but the quality and the kind of genres and also genres that came up, that's really praiseworthy and commendable. If I have to mention some of those guys in India and Pakistan, Mulkraj Anand, the Untouchable, that definitely that's a satire on the lower class Vern caste system, Brahmins and Kshatriya and Shudra and Vash. And this captures the plight of those untouchables, those who were, in fact, scavengers of society. And this really delved deeper into the kind of predicament, the kind of despicable and then the kind of life they're subjected to because the British faulty policy of exploitation of the masses. Then we have Kamala Das, The Old Playhouse, and other poems. We have Anita Desai, Clear Light of the Day. We have Zulfikar Ghosh, some of the selected poems. We have A.K. Malhotra, the Oxford Indian Anthology of 12 modern Indian poets. And no doubt we would forget R.K. Narayan's The Malgudi Days and The Guide. Recently I was watching some of the Malgudi Days episodes. That's wonderfully realistic and so brilliantly presented through the characters were lifelike characters. The guide, then we have the Raja Rao, the serpent, the rope. We have one among the one whose birthday was celebrated yesterday, Salman Rushdie, although a bit controversial in his works, especially the one which was banned in India worldwide because of his profanity and his unfavorable remarks about one particular community, Islam, and there's another one is Midnight Children. Salman Rushdie, one being notable among the British writers, he settled there, and he has been in the hiding for a couple of years because of the fatwa from Iran. And now he has been quite vocal, he has been quite experimental, and he has tried and tested some of the, nothing off limit to him. In fact, this Midnight Children also talks about Indira Gandhi's emergency days. And then we have Shyam Salvadurai, Cinnamon Gardens, Bapsi Sidhwa, Cracking India, Sarah Suleri, Meatless Days, and above all, Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore. Now, if I have to mention some of those post-colonial writers, elsewhere, apart from India and Pakistan, like in Caribbeans and in African and Australian and New Zealand, we find a kind of bondage, a kind of commonalities, and the features and the manifestations of post-colonial literature, they share one thing in common. Since they all have been under the subjugation of the mighty empire, British Empire, and they tried to impose English, not as a language per se, but the cultural domination. It was kind of hijacking and destroying the, or kind of, not letting the local culture grow or stand neck to neck or face to face with the British culture, because through culture invasion and through scientific and industrial development, the Britishers, they had swayed the influence in major parts of the world, and since their own situation, the World War II, they didn't allow them to continue ruling over the vast sections of societies of vast countries like India and Nigeria and those kind of places where administratively it was inconvenient for the Britishers to continue ruling with an iron hand, so they had to consider leaving, quitting, and while quitting, they had a plan, a nefarious plan, and that they had a design, and the design was to leave the legacy, the British legacy, in one form or the other. And one of the legacies and that we have is the dominance or the predominance or the post-dominance and post-colonial of English, which happened to be the most dominant language by virtue of being the internet language, by virtue of being the commercial language, language of the people, language of the cosmopolitans, language of the navigation, navy and all that. 80% of the world internet information is stored in one language alone. Americans and Australians and other English-speaking countries. So together they account for the massive growth and prosperity and its dynamism and ever-strengthening robustness of the language and its sway over others, somehow killing the nativity, the native languages or regional languages, or not letting industry of the publications or kind of print journalism or media and all that So naturally, India had to consider English not as a second language after Hindi as a national language, but as a lingua franca like in other English-speaking country. So English being a second language, I mean, as speaker, as users, as makes so much of inroads into the Indian that the amount of print media or amount of original writings, and that tantamount to a large corpus which may or may not be recognized with the world literary bodies, but it goes without saying. I mean, there shouldn't be any misgivings among anyone, that Indian writers, whether they have been Anglo-Indians or have been chosen to stay in England and the US and other places and remained double citizens with double passports, but they continue to write, and somehow they continue to regain the same kind of post-colonial spirit, and they continue writing, putting the Indian figures and protagonists at the center of their theme. And when we look at all these books, novels, we'll find this centrality or the basic recurrent theme remains revolving around the Indian culture and heritage. And E.M. Forster in Passage to India truly recounts how India has been a prime destination for those who are wanting to add to their spiritual awakening, or I would mention T.S. Eliot and those kind of people. They always look forward to Indian literature, since Indian literature has not been translated to the extent like French and Greek, and so it has not gotten that kind of prominence into, but the amount of Indian literature remains massive despite not being readily available on whether it's Wikipedia or other kinds of sources. So post-colonial novel becomes a trope for an ideal hybridity with which the West celebrate not so much Indianness, whatever that infinitely complex thing is, but its own historical quest, its reinterpretation of itself. The early exponents of post-colonial Indian English literature, and I would again mention those people who have made a mark in the Banking Chand Chatterjee, Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar, Shri Aurobindo Rabindranath Tagore, Mulkraj Anand, Raja Rao, R.K. Narayan, Amitabh Ghosh, Vikram Seth, and I'll go to extent of including Shashi Tharoor also, because lots of books have been credited with his original writing, and he happens to be one of the literary giants of today. The post-colonial Indian English literature gave enormous scope for the women writers as well. The women writers I have to mention, and those who were really recognized universally, are Nayantara Sehgal, Anita Desai, Arundhati Roy, Karan Desai, Jhumpa Lahiri, and there are many more. The list is endless. Notably, Salman Rushdie has gotten an upper hand, and because he has lived in England for so long, and he has been widely circulated. Like Midnight Children, published in 1981, ushered in a new trend in post-colonial writing. Why was it's a new trend causing? Because the technique that he used, that was magical realism. What is that magical realism all about? This is an unexpected alteration of reality. That means he goes into allegorical characters and unaccustomed insight that's singularly favored by the unexpected richness of reality. That means his characters are lifelike, even the allegorical references are lifelike, and an amplification of the scale and categories of reality. So basically he's from Bombay, and he has lived in Bombay, and he has tasted the flavor, the real flavor of India first, before becoming an Anglophile or Anglophone. The technique of magical realism used by Indian English writer as a post-colonial effort to resist the European notions of realism. So in a sharp contrast to realism that is prevalent in Europe, our realism, as a magical realism, promotes hybridity of cultures by defamiliarizing the readers and by broadening the perspective of the global world. I mean, India is like a continent. Our literature is not bound or isn't unitary in its character. It's universal, and it includes literature from thousands of years, and is the amalgamation of the wisdom that has been reaped over centuries. So it's not like 200 or 300 years of history of American literature, post-independence American literature. So, for example, the Salim Sanai is the protagonist in the novel, and who stands as a representative of the new class of Indian youths after independence. Now, Indian youths after independence, they are, they are poised, they have a fighting spirit, they are on the spree of winning the world, and they suffer from lots of cruel realities, and they are the victims of the colonized superpowers, and they have been subjected to all kinds of, but still they have the urge to rise up to the world challenges. And so nationalism, realism, politics, partition, and post-colonial Indian scene, the growth and development of each, and every individual is directly proportional to the wholesome development of the nation. So he's on one hand rooted to his ancestry, the rich lineage, the parentage. He is a devout Hindu, he is a devout Christian, he is a devout Muslim, he is a devout. He is one of the, maybe the lowest caste of the Varna, the Dalits and all, but still he has the spark, the ambition of scaling the heights. The women writers also, like post-colonial Indian English literature, switch on to microscopic themes of alienation. The women, those who have been, never been in the forefront in because they have always been, as a secondary gender, subsidiary to, and they have felt alienated, they have been poverty-stricken, they have been victimized and isolated, and they have been disillusioned in the male patriarchal society. But still they have the urge to fight back, like Anita Desai's first novel, Cry the Peacock, that was published in 1963, echoes the sufferings and agony of Indian women folk. So the protagonist, like Maya, she's ready to challenge, and she experiences an unhappy marital relationship, middle-aged lawyer married to a middle-aged lawyer named Gautama, and who devotes much of his time to his career. So when we look at the literature of these women folk, and there is an urge for the breaking the shackles of the social bondages and trying to come out as in the form of emancipation and to enjoy the life to the fullest. So a sense of dejection, a kind of rootlessness, and the plights of the entire Indian women folk, and being subject to as a second sex. And so we find the post-colonial and English authors with a view to voicing their sufferings of underprivileged in order to uplift them. So there is an urge to not only get their predicament noticed, sung in the elegies, and also contributing to the growth of the nation. Nationalism can be culturally, can be socially. So English language, defines the term nationalism as what? A sense of identification with one's own nation and to extend one's support for its interests. So that's what rings true in Indian context. Like when we have, the Indian writers, they have broken away from the imperialism. The Indian people, they have to rejoice in their newfound freedom. They have enjoyed the fresh air freedom, and there's a sense of a reverence towards the nation. They want the nation to be at par with the rest of the world. They want the nation to be recognized as one of the powerful nations, one of the nations with lots and lots of genuinely gifted writers, authors, of the scientists, those who have, and those who can show the world that they're not the one to be cowed down, to be subjugated, to be exploited, to be discriminated, to be intimidated, to be left in a lurch, to be looked down upon, and even despite the problems, the race, the gender, the caste, the color, the creed, the region, and languages, and so on, that could be their own endemic problems, and they're ready to face those problems. So they're trying to fight back the anti-nationalist forces, those who wanted to divide people, and Britishers were very successful in really dividing based on the lingua concerned, like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, primarily those Urdu speaking, those living in and those who are Muslims, and they have already divided and made the nations fragile before leaving them. That was their ploy, not to leave India as a nation, as a strong nation, because they wanted these competing nations at loggerheads in the years to come, because that served their own purpose. If they had left a nation as powerful as themselves, they would have been in deep trouble, because they had to fight tooth and nail to ascertain their supremacy over, this white supremacy, the Western imperialistic supremacy, and these kind of things, they linger on. Had we not fought the First World War and the Second World War, and the British and the backbone not have been, the back has not been broken in the sense of economic fallout and their poor economic showdown and the loss of destructions and the depletion of the resources in the Second World War, fighting against Allied and Axis sources. So Germany, and so our own writers, they say, rise up and salute the sun, and they want to unite the people on the basis of their literature, of their culture, of their language, of their faiths and beliefs in their own nation. And that nation has been, the leader, the front runner, and they've paved the way to the rest of the nation in not only medicine, philosophy, and polity, and religious spiritualism, and all. So literature, of course, plays an important role in national integration of the country. So a rich literature, and that too in our own basic language, that will speak for us. Instead of depending on the foreign language and a language which is, like a business, a commerce language, we cannot have the true nationalistic fervor, national spirit, and have and a strong nation as long as we follow or we copy and we keep promoting something which is not our own, and that will never make us feel proud. So obviously the purpose of the writer was to protect our civilization and they hope to leave India not destroyed culturally or so it's possible only for writers to shape the minds of the readers. So writers play a very definitive and they have a lasting impression of the psyche of the people, because literature molds the outlook of the commoners, and all those nationalistic songs or kind of devotion songs that they not only helped us achieve freedom and broke away from the shackles of the Britishers, they also promoted the true nationalistic fervor among us, the holistic view of nationalism. So the post-colonial Indian writers continue to exert a dominant influence in the Indian scenario by not only inculcating the values and the significance of nationalism, but also they brought about literature of a big reservoir of rich literature in English, and they were original literature. In fact, they were not either copied from the Romanticists or copied from the Realists. In fact, it was the kind of realism of its own. And I must salute those Indian writers who have been writing prolific in a vast manner, in a very effective way. And post-colonial studies, they require a lot of researches and a lot of reading, not only by we Indians, but also by the rest of the world. And Gitanjali has already been translated in so many languages now, and Indian literature, English literature, remains a potent source of inspiration for the rest of the world in a true sense. And as far as the diction, the style, and the lyricism, and the kind of, it always been supremely brilliant. And I happened to read some of those, and I was really amazed the kind of, diction, the kind of literary fervor that we find in the literature of these eminent literary giants and the people of eminence. I'll be aiming for bringing about some videos on YouTube to highlight some of the major literary giants and their major works in be it the form of novel or drama or poetry or in any form, any genre. And I'm hoping to bring about some videos for those learners and the students of in India, those who don't find readily available resources or cut and dried information on thematic aspects of these books, characterization, symbolism, usage of, and the kind of underlying the current of because most of the paraphrased kind of cheaper editions of books available from the publishing houses, they are not done professionally, and they don't really cater to the dire need of those who really want to come up with some sort of assignments which has intrinsic value and which help us learn literature and appreciate it critically Because when we have the literature, the critical acclaim, why can't we have the interpretations or the critical appraisal of those, apart from those journals? And because journals are all paid, and you have to subscribe, you have to be you have to dole out a lot of kind of fortune for those struggling to study in colleges. Students, they find it, and they have to pay through the nose. And moreover, those kind of journals entries, which are research-based articles, and they delve deeper, too deep, and they have a perspective, and a particular perspective looking at particular aspects of that genre, and that really doesn't help to have a comprehensive outlook of all kinds of thematic and the kind of intended learning outcomes of graduates, undergraduates, graduates, or even postgraduate students. Hoping to get hold of something on some literary pieces and some of the notable writers and some of the videos in the near future. Wish me good luck in my endeavor, if I could be able to deliver it sooner or later. Thank you so much. So this was a kind of intimation, a kind of news for those wanting to read some of the literary pieces. And I would like to begin with Indian writers, focusing on only those prominent ones. Thank you for being a patient listener, and have a nice day.